We've got multiple pitchers adding cutters. We've got positive injury updates. We've got prospects showing out on the mound. It's all coming up. Reports from this week at spring training on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, March 14th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're getting you everything you need to know from this week in Sarasota for the Orioles at spring training. All the news and notes, hitting, pitching, injuries, player performances, adding pitches, whatever it may be, I've got you covered here on a Friday episode. We'll talk about Félix Cano and Cionel Pérez all adding a new pitch. We'll talk about Levi Wells and Zach Fruit. Wow. We'll talk about getting positive updates on Andrew Kittredge, Gunnar Henderson, and Jorge Mateo in their injury progression, and much, much more. But it's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So let's jump into some spring training news and notes, and we will start with the pitching side. I will warn you, most of these are going to be pitching updates. This first segment of the show is going to be a tad bit longer than the other two when we talk about hitting, and then we talk about some injury updates. But there was some exciting stuff that we saw this week. Kind of a recap on what the Orioles spring training schedule was for this week. They had a game on Monday, which was broadcasted and on StatCast. They had a game on Tuesday, same thing, broadcast and StatCast. Wednesday, they had neither, and then Thursday against the Blue Jays, also broadcast and StatCast. So we have a lot to go over in the 4 days of spring training action since we last did one of these spring training report episodes. So let's begin with the pitching, and I want to start in mostly chronological order, going back to Monday, where the Orioles did not use a true starting pitcher. They kind of used Monday as a spring training bullpen day. Hey, let's get 7, 8+ pitchers into this game, get them all some work, and Matt Bowman was the first guy to pitch. Bowman, who was with the Orioles in the bullpen last year, O's brought him back on a minor league deal, brought him to big league camp, and now with us knowing that Andrew Kittredge will start the year on the injured list and the Orioles having an open spot in their bullpen, Bowman is one of the guys in the running to get one of those spots, and he was fantastic in his outing on Monday. Some absolute nasty stuff in the first inning. He struck out Jack Sawinski, Bryan Reynolds, and O'Neal Cruz, three of the Pirates' everyday regulars, all left-handed hitters. Bowman, a righty who has struggled against some lefties in his career. 2 of those strikeouts came via the cutter. Lefties hit .429 against Bowman's cutter last year between the 4 teams he pitched for in 2024. So that's a great sign. The cutter has some more horizontal break, some less vertical break. He kind of changed the shape of that pitch. And the shape of it, it looks like disgusting from that funky sidearm crossbody delivery that you see from Matt Bowman. It was really, really nice to see him go out there and look like that. And again, he's got a chance to make this team with the Andrew Kittredge injury. We'll talk about a little bit later who else he's going up against. But Bowman is certainly in the mix. Now, it kind of works against him that because he's here on a minor league deal, he can just be sent to AAA to begin the year without passing through waivers. And there are other guys in a similar position who cannot have that done to them, but Bowman could still easily pitch his way onto this roster, and he at least did it back on Monday. We also saw Félix Bautista on Monday. That was very, very nice to see. For the first time, pitching on 2 days rest this spring, so getting himself closer and closer to being back on the mound and ready for opening day. He threw a fastball at 98.5 miles an hour. That was his hardest pitch yet, which is certainly a good sign here in spring training, and was sitting 97. He was kind of more so sitting 95 in his last outing. So that is a great sign. Not up to the 99, 100 regularly like we are used to seeing from Félix, but he's getting closer and closer. But the most interesting thing from Bautista in that outing on Monday against the Pirates was we saw him throw a cutter. He threw 24 pitches, 14 fastballs, 6 splitters, 2 sliders. That's his usual mix, but also 2 cutters. And you could tell it was not his normal slider, mostly because the pitch had a lot more vertical on it. It didn't move from right to left as much, and the velocity was different. His slider, he was throwing it 84. That cutter was 91 to 92, actually it was really 91 to 93 almost on that pitch. And it was different, and it moved different, and it looked pretty good. And, again, he only threw 2 of them, but Félix talked to the media after the game and did confirm, yes, I have added a cutter to my arsenal, starting to throw that. Now, you may ask, Félix Bautista was one of the best relievers in all of baseball the last time we saw him. He throws 100 of this weird ride sinker with the best splitter in the league. Why does he need to add a 4th pitch when he already doesn't throw his slider, his 3rd pitch, all that much? Well, if he can throw it, and it's going to be a good offering, why not add it when he may not still be 100% of Félix when he first gets back to the big league mound here early this season? Why not have as many tools in his tool belt as possible? A cutter can be another weapon against left-handed pitchers for Félix Bautista. Maybe it even helps him against righties. If it just is a harder and better version of his slider, we could see it just replace that slider that he doesn't really throw all that often. So I'm really intrigued to see what we'll see from that cutter moving forward, and if he does throw it in the regular season. But I am very down for him to add another pitch and toy with what he can do from that huge frame. Did want to shout out Levi Stout, who continued to throw a huge induced vertical break fastball in the mid-90s with 20 inches of IVB, maybe an outside bullpen contender for later in the year. But the Levi who really stepped up was Levi Wells, who 4th-round pick out of Texas State, right-handed pitcher for the Orioles in 2023, came into a game earlier this week and had a fastball up to 100, was sitting 98, had an absolutely wicked slider. It was serious stuff. Now, Wells was in Aberdeen for most of last year, 60 innings, 74 strikeouts. That was good. A 6.71 ERA was not so good. He did have an injury, and when he came back from it, he was much, much better. And he got a strikeout to strand the bases loaded in Monday's game and was fired up coming off the mound. Probably the most emotion we've seen from any Orioles pitcher in spring training so far. It was just honestly quite an outing to see from Wells. I mean, that slider was 83 to 85. He had a good cutter that he threw. He tossed in a curveball, but him hitting 100 with that 4-seam fastball that had some good movement, like it was fun to watch him throw those 2 scoreless innings on Monday. Excited to see what he'll do when he gets to Double-A this season for the Orioles and how fast he can move up the system, especially if he gets converted to more of a relief role moving forward. And we also got to see another young pitcher on Monday, and that was Luis De Leon, 21-year-old left-handed pitcher. He will be 22 in April. FanGraphs had him as the number 8 prospect in the Orioles system. He split last year between Delmarva and Aberdeen at the single-A level. 88 innings, 4.62 ERA, 26% strikeout rate, and a 12% walk rate. Not sure about the full data at this point on what De Leon did. StatCast and the broadcast were all messed up while he was out there. We finally have some data. He was 95 to 97 with his sinker. Slider at 87 had some good movement, and then he did toss in a couple of changeups at about 88 miles an hour. It was a 3-pitch mix for the young left-hander. He's got some command issues he still has to work on. Again, I expect him to get to Double-A this season, another guy who's going to get himself into the high minors, but really interesting arm angle, hides the ball. It's funky. It's different. Another exciting young pitching prospect in this depth of the Orioles system that we got to see on Monday. Moving it to Tuesday, Albert Suarez got the start in that one for the Orioles against the Yankees and had by far his best spring outing. His fastball was up to 96, sitting 94 to 95 miles an hour. That is pretty much the normal velocity we were used to from Suarez in 2024. So good to see that about 2 weeks before opening day, that he is where he needs to be. And he was doing what he does when he's on. He was working that fastball up in the zone, getting pop-ups, getting swings and misses on that 4-seamer, and was throwing all 5 pitches for strikes. We even saw that new slurve to add a 5th pitch to go along with the fastball and the cutter and the curveball and the changeup. And he had 15 total whiffs, 15 swings and misses. He only did that. Remember, Suarez made 24 starts last year. In only 5 of them did he have more than 15 whiffs. And this is in a start on Tuesday where he's not pitching the entire game. He's not built up to that point yet. I mean, he did throw 70 pitches, but it was only in 4 innings to get 15 whiffs. Really impressive stuff from Suarez, what we saw. And that 38.4% was his total swing and miss rate on Tuesday. Only one start he had for the Orioles last year had a better whiff rate than 38.4%. That's how good Suarez was in spring. And that was kind of this year's version of that start he had against the Phillies last year in spring training when he threw those 3 basically perfect innings and all the Phillies hitters were like, who is this? And Brandon Hyde was kind of like, who is this? And he really broke onto the scene in spring and led to his breakout season helping out the Orioles pitching staff last year. We got that version again on Tuesday against the Yankees. All the stuff was working. He was getting a lot of chases outside the zone. He struck out Aaron Judge twice, made him look silly. The changeup was really, really nasty at times. And also good to see him get the pitch count up to 70, which means if he is going to be the number 5 starter, it's still a battle right now between him and Cade Povich for that final spot because Grayson Rodriguez will be starting the season on the injured list. Next start, he goes out there, he'll build up to probably 80 plus, and that'll get him pretty much ready to go for the regular season. So all good signs for Suarez, who did get off to a bit of a slow start this spring. We also saw Yennier Cano a couple of times this week. He actually pitched on Tuesday and Thursday, which is a good sign. Not on back-to-back days just yet, but pitching on 1 day's rest in spring training means Hyde feels he's pretty close to ready to go for the season with about 2 weeks left until opening day. And when Cano had his first outing of the spring that we had StatCast data on, I talked about how some of his sliders that he was throwing had like way less break than we're used to. And I thought they looked like his old slider and it almost looked like a cutter. Well, it turns out he is adding a cutter. And Cano did talk about it. Ben McDonald talked about it on the broadcast on Tuesday. He's now throwing a cutter. He threw 5 of them on Tuesday. They were 92 to 93 miles an hour. And it's a pitch that just gives him another weapon versus left-handed pitching. Because if you remember, early last year, Cano was having some struggles specifically against lefties, and the sinker changeup combination with the slider tossed in wasn't working as well. So he added the 4-seam fastball to his repertoire, and that helped him against left-handers. Well, now he is adding a cutter, which is another pitch that he threw all 5 cutters he threw against lefties in the outing on Tuesday. So clearly it is a weapon against lefties, which have hit him hard at times. Like he's dominated righties, but he's had some struggles against left-handers. That's what the cutter is going to do. Now, he didn't throw a 4-seam fastball Tuesday, and he threw 5 cutters. And I actually thought the 4-seamer was a pretty good weapon for him against lefties. But then he pitched in the 8th inning on Thursday, and he threw all 5 pitches. He brought back the 4-seamer, and he tossed in a couple of cutters in that outing. So good to see him kind of working on everything, but you know, a harder, kind of shorter slider, 92, 93, I think could be a nice addition to Cano's arsenal. You'll sense a theme here. Felix adding a cutter, Yennier Cano adding a cutter. We are not done. But first, I got to shout out the other big time, well, not big time, but other pitching prospect who had a big time outing this week, and that is Zach Fruit on Tuesday. Right-handed pitcher, 2023 9th round pick by the Orioles out of Troy. He was incredible in 3 innings on Tuesday against the Yankees. 3 scoreless innings, 2 hits, 5 Ks, no walks on 38 pitches. He was nasty. And now the Aaron Judges of the world were not in the lineup anymore at the end of the game, but it was still some major league caliber players he was facing. 8 whiffs on 18 swings, fastball sat 98 and touched 100.3 miles an hour with that Zach Fruit fastball. 90-ish mile per hour cutter that was one of the best pitches I've seen a pitching prospect from the Orioles throw in a long time. There was a good slider he had to go with it. I mean, you could dream on the stuff that he was throwing. Had a sinker that he was dropping in there as well. 4-pitch mix. He split it up pretty well. He got 4 whiffs on the 4-seamer, 8 on the cutter, 3 on the sinker, 2 on the 4-seamer, 4 on the cutter, 2 on the slider. Like he was getting swings and misses on his different offerings. That was a fun outing to watch from Zach Fruit. That got me really, really excited about that guy. He was in Aberdeen last year, Orioles number 30 prospect on FanGraphs. Had a 3.03 ERA and 107 innings for the Ironbirds last year. He's going to be in Double-A Chesapeake this season as well. That Bay Sox pitching staff, both the starters and the relievers that they're going to use this year, that is probably going to be the position group out of the entire Orioles minor league system that's going to be the most must watch, because all of these under the radar pitchers who have succeeded are going to be in Bowie this year. They're probably not going to be factors in the big leagues until at least 2026, but they're really going to start to separate themselves this year. And Fruit is certainly one of those guys. And then we move to Thursday, because again, on Wednesday, it's no broadcast, it's no StatCast. We aren't going to take a lot out of that. Dean Kramer started, and he stayed healthy. That's the biggest update pretty much that I've got from Wednesday. But Thursday, we went to Cade Povich, who had what I would call the perfect bad spring training start, because the scoreline doesn't look great. 4 2/3 innings, 5 runs on 8 hits with a homer allowed on 69 pitches. But it's good that he got his pitch count up to 69 from Povich. And it's also good that he got beat for 2 reasons. One, his defense completely let him down like 3 or 4 times. The Orioles did not send a very major league ready offense or defensive alignment, I would say, for the game against the Blue Jays on Thursday. It was, I mean, you look in the starting lineup and there was only one player in the starting lineup who was projected to make the opening day roster, and that is Ramon Laureano, who's going to be the 5th outfielder on this team. That was the only guy in the lineup who was a projected opening day guy. So yeah, they didn't really send any of the regulars, and that hurts you also on defense as well for your starting pitcher. You don't have your top defense behind you, and that definitely showed with a couple of rough-looking defensive plays by the Orioles. But Povich threw strikes, and honestly, he threw too many strikes. A lot of his breaking balls were in the middle of the plate. They got hit hard. That led to the 5 runs, gave up a home run to Dalton Varsho. But that's a bad spring training outing that I'm okay with. If you are mixing your pitches, trying to find the feel for your breaking balls and just throwing them in the middle of the plate to make sure you can throw them for strikes, and you're working on things, that's fine. The bad outings are when you're walking a bunch of guys, your command's all over the place, and it's bad. He was throwing a lot of strikes. He retired 8 batters in a row at one point. He was being very efficient when it was going well for him, and the defense was actually fielding balls. I take that as a plus for Povich, and just very much right in that mix to get that number 5 spot heading into the season in the Orioles rotation. But I told you we were not done with guys adding cutters. Add Cionel Pérez to that list. Now, it was interesting because I didn't even really notice it on Tuesday. Perez first pitched in the game Tuesday against the Yankees, and it didn't show up initially, but it turns out 3 of his 13 pitches he threw in that game were cutters, and I barely noticed them. It was an 88 to 89 mile per hour pitch. Well, then he went back out there against the Blue Jays on Thursday and threw 15 pitches, and once again, 3 of them were cutters, and I was like, wait a second. Cionel Pérez has a new pitch. This is a guy who has never thrown a cutter in his career. Last year, he was 4-seam fastball, slider, and sinker. In the past, he's also thrown a curveball and a changeup in the big leagues with the Reds and the Astros and a little bit with the Orioles, but never a cutter until this spring training. Again, it's been 88 to 89. One of them was up to 90. They weren't as noticeable Tuesday, but the ones he threw on Thursday against the Blue Jays were really nasty. He threw a good one to get a swing and a miss from Andres Jimenez against a lefty, and then he struck out Miles Straw with one in the dirt to finish his scoreless inning. I mean, Miles Straw is an absolutely abysmal major league hitter. He's on a team because he's an elite defensive center fielder, but still made that guy look ridiculous with that cutter in the dirt. It had good break. It's got good velocity. It's not as loopy as his slider or even his old curveball. And when he would throw his curveball and his changeup, that was a way for him to neutralize right-handed hitters. He hasn't thrown those as much over the years. He's never thrown a changeup with the Orioles, kind of dropped that pitch when they claimed him off waivers in 2022. But the cutter can be a pitch to neutralize righties. And although Cionel Pérez has been good against both kind of hitters, lefties hit 202, righties hit 257 against him in 2024. I mean, he is clearly better left on left. This gives him another weapon to work against righties. Really interesting to see the Orioles adding all these cutters to their bullpen repertoires. And speaking of adding stuff to the repertoires, the last pitcher to talk about is Bryan Baker. Bryan, who pitched in the game on Thursday against the Blue Jays, his old organization. Remember, he was 9 up, 9 down in his first 3 outings. Then his last outing over the weekend, he gave up 3 homers in like an inning and 2/3. And I was like, I don't know. This was good stuff. Now, he pitched the 7th inning, came back out there in the 8th, walked the leadoff batter, and then was taken out of the game. But wow, I think I'm ready to call it. As much as I love Matt Bowman, if you made me pick right now, I'm giving Andrew Kittredge's open bullpen spot away right now. I am giving it to Bryan Baker. I know we are still 13 days away from opening day, but I am giving that spot to Bryan Baker right now. I have seen the changes he has made, and he looks really, really good. All 3 pitches, fastball, changeup, slider, were incredible on Thursday. His slider velo is up from 88 to about 90, through a filthy one to get a swing and miss from our old buddy Anthony Santander. His fastball was up to 99.1 miles an hour. He was more like 96 with that pitch between AAA and the big leagues last year, so that's cool to see on the 4-seamer. And we've talked a lot about this spring about how Baker has changed his changeup because he just randomly found a new grip. Good story about that in the Baltimore Banner over the last week or so. But it almost looked like on Thursday, he threw both changeups. The old one, the big loopy one that comes in at about 81, 82. He kind of looped one in for a called strike 3 against the first batter he faced. But then later in the outing, he was throwing the firmer, harder changeup at about 86 with less movement, but I think will be a better pitch overall. And threw a disgusting one to get a swing and miss to strike out Dalton Varsho to end the inning. Was maybe the best pitch I've ever seen Bryan Baker throw. That's how good that changeup was. So maybe he can control both of them and has both changeups in his bag. One is more of like an eephus change, and the other one, the hard drop off the table at the end changeup. But I could be proven wrong on Bryan Baker. I was on the Baker train. I mean, everyone else had jumped off the Bryan Baker train except me. And then finally, it was at some point last year, I was just like, yeah, that's it. I'm done with Bryan Baker. I am officially here, March 14th, 2025, back on the Bryan Baker train. It looks really, really good. Put this man on the opening day roster. He's out of options, so there's a good chance he will be with the open spot. But let's give him one more shot because he has certainly revamped what he can do. And it's looking good out there on the mound for Baker. That'll do it for the pitching notes. We've got not as many, but some hitting notes to get to, and that will be coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. You can pick your favorites. I've got my eye on a few interesting underdogs. I'm hoping none of them get matched up with the Terps in the first round of the men's tournament this year. But if you like an underdog, maybe you like McNeese and Will Wade. They just punched their ticket on Wednesday. Maybe you like UNCW, who looks like an interesting team. Maybe you like High Point. There are some definitely interesting Cinderella-type stories. You can get in on them on FanDuel. And the FanDuel app, if you're making those bets, it's simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. So on our spring training notes episode, we move it over to the hitters. Not as much to talk about there, but still some interesting things. And we first start with Jordan Westburg, who is back in these Orioles lineup. Still hasn't played back-to-back days just yet, but he started at third base, had a double and a single in the game on Monday. All good things for Westburg as he seems to be recovered from that sore back that was from a bad mattress at his Airbnb where he had to get a mattress topper to get it more like his bed at home. His back recovered. He's back in spring training game. Seems to be all good for opening day. And what was nice with Westburg at third, the Orioles started Jackson Holliday at shortstop on Monday's game against the Pirates because we still don't know what the status is going to be for Gunnar Henderson for opening day, dealing with that intercostal strain, although there are some positive updates that we'll get to in the final segment. Holliday did have a bad throwing error in the second inning, getting the start at short. It is his natural position, but over the last year plus, the Orioles have kind of fully converted him to second base, knowing, hey, we have Gunnar Henderson at shortstop in the big leagues. Jackson, you're going to be our everyday second baseman to just fit better on this roster. And he's looked really, really good. He's progressed so well defensively at second. Brandon Hyde has talked about how there's a little bit of worry. Do we want to put Jackson back at shortstop for just a couple of weeks, have him only focus on short because we know he'll play there, but we know Gunnar will be back quickly? Is that going to mess with Jackson's timing at short, his timing going back over to second? I think there's a little worry there. I think he's a good enough athlete to be okay, but I still think he's probably the better option to put there than Jordan Westburg at this point if they don't have Gunnar. But what I did like was the alignment on Monday, because it was Westburg at third base, Holliday at shortstop, and Ramon Arias at second base was the infield alignment. And that is what I think it should be to begin the year if Gunnar Henderson is on the injured list. And the reason I bring it up is that's not what the Orioles have done in the past. Now, when it hadn't been Holliday and it had instead been Gunnar at short, the Orioles would generally play Westburg at second and Arias at third in that alignment. And that made sense for a while because Ramon Arias won the Gold Glove at third base in 2022. That's probably someone you want there defensively. And both players are versatile, and both players, Westburg and Arias, can play second and third and have played both at the major league level. My issue is when you look at the numbers from 2024 specifically, things started to change for both of them. And it became pretty clear what the better positions were for both guys. Arias' defensive stats went way down at third while they stayed good at second. And Westburg's defensive stats went way down at second while they stayed good at third. So it makes sense that Westburg would play third and Arias would play second in this alignment. and that is the better defensive lineman for the Orioles, and it was nice to see that in the lineup on Monday. Now, I will say they flipped it back to the other alignment Wednesday. Westberg was back in the lineup, and it was Westberg at second, Holiday at short, and Arias at third. They're still going to play those guys both places, especially in spring training. But I hope when we get to the regular season, if they do need to do it, hopefully we don't need to see it, right? That they do need to play that alignment with Gunnar on the IL. I just think it's better for everybody. Arias at second, Westberg at third. Samuel Basallo, holy moly, on Monday. 3-run homer over the stands off like the indoor batting cage in right center field for a 3-run shot. Hanging slider off our old friend Isaac Mattson, who years ago made his major league debut with the Orioles, was the fourth pitcher along with Bradish, Brinovich, and Peak, who came over from the Angels in the Dylan Bundy trade. If you remember that name, you are one of the OGs listening to this podcast. But Isaac Mattson, he met Samuel Basallo. 111.3 miles per hour exit velocity off the bat, 403 feet. StatCast said it would have been a home run in 29 of 30 MLB ballparks. I'm convinced it would have been a home run in all 30 ballparks. It's probably San Francisco that it wouldn't have been a home run in, may have gotten caught out in that triples alley out there. But either way, the dude's power, it's ridiculous. The catching defense is getting better. Again, I tell you this, every single spring training notes episode this spring, I have talked about Samuel Basallo. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. He's not going to be on the opening day roster, but I think the bat's going to get him to the big leagues this year. It is just amazing to watch every single time. And then speaking of home runs, Ryan Mountcastle on Tuesday against the Yankees hit his first home run of the spring. 3-run shot to right field off of Clark Schmidt. It was a line drive home run, 108 off the bat. Now, I was still kind of waiting for that poolside approach to come back, right? Ryan Mountcastle, nobody pulled the ball less among qualified hitters in Major League Baseball last year than Ryan Mountcastle. And we think some had to do with the vertigo and some had to do with the Orioles moving the wall back in 2022. And since then, he's hit the ball to right field more and more. But he's even doing it on the road. And I was worried it kind of killed his approach. Well, now they're bringing the left field wall back in some. And that should lead to Mountcastle having more success pulling the ball in the air to left field. Instead of being long, frustrating flyouts, they should turn back into some home runs and extra base hits for him once again. But then we see another opposite field approach. However, while we don't really have great video of it Wednesday, he hit another homer on Wednesday, and this one went out to left field. So that is certainly good news for Mountcastle. This is a guy who's going to thrive pulling the ball in the air to left field. Let's see him do that again like he did when he hit 30-plus home runs in 2021. But those are the hitting notes. We've also got some positive injury updates to get you for the Orioles. That's coming up to finish off the show right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I mean, look, when you start using Monarch, you can realize how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter, you can save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, Monarch does it all. Check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. So we finish things off on a spring training notes episode with some injury notes and roster notes for the Orioles, starting with Gunnar Henderson, who hit in the cage for the first time on Tuesday since being shut down for a bit with that mild intercostal strain that he took a couple of weeks ago. He then on Wednesday took ground balls on the field for the first time. He continues to hit and take grounders. Brandon Hyde said everything he did Tuesday and Wednesday went, quote, extremely well. He is still trying to recover from that injury and is still trying to get back for opening day. We're kind of in the TBD stretch right now. We got 13 days left. He's hitting and taking grounders, but we got to wait to see him in spring training games before we can kind of make it official that he will be ready. I'm feeling optimistic that Gunnar will be good. It's nice that the Orioles have contingency plans if he's not, but things are moving in the positive direction for Gunnar Henderson. But one of those contingency plans, if he's not ready, could be Jorge Mateo, who took on-field batting practice on Tuesday and was also taking ground balls along with Gunnar on Wednesday. and is now saying that he thinks he could be ready for opening day. Remember, Mateo got Tommy John surgery on his left arm, his non-throwing arm, after that gruesome collision and injury with Gunnar Henderson back in August in Miami. Mike Elias said about a month ago that he expected Mateo to begin the season on the injured list, but that he would be ready early in the year and would help the Orioles in 2025. Well, now it's Mateo saying, hey, I might be good. Like, he's taking BPs, taking grounders. If he's okay and Gunnar's not, that would be the easiest Gunnar Henderson replacement. You wouldn't have to think about, Levon Soto or Luis Vasquez or Vimael Machine or anyone like that. You would just roster Jorge Mateo if he's healthy. If Gunnar Henderson began the year on the IL, because Mateo, we know, can play a good shortstop. He can come off the bench, be your backup shortstop for Jackson and Westberg, and that's all you need. Now, the question obviously for Mateo is, okay, once Gunnar comes back after 10 days, or if both Mateo and Henderson are healthy for opening day, what in the world would the Orioles do with this roster? Because they've kind of built the roster to a point where there's not really a good spot for Jorge Mateo. And I'm going to talk about this more next week when I do my full Orioles infield preview. But Mateo did not have a very great year in 2024. And now the Orioles have upgraded the bench part of the roster. If Mateo is ready for opening day, I think that would actually be a bad thing for him. I think for his future roster outlook, it'd be better for him to spend a couple of weeks to a month on the injured list. And then maybe by May, he's good to go and someone else is hurt. Because if everyone's healthy and performing, it could be Mateo that gets DFA'd. I'm not sure he's better than anyone else that's scheduled to make this roster right now. But he's still on the roster at the moment. That cannot be said the same for the 9 camp cuts the Orioles made on Tuesday. 2 guys from the 40-man roster, right-handed reliever Cade Stroud and left-handed reliever Luis Gonzalez, were optioned to AAA. Those 2 were added to the 40-man this offseason. We knew they weren't going to be on the opening day roster, but both could help the Oriole bullpen at some point this year. And then other non-roster invitees who were reassigned to minor league count, the position players, catcher David Banuelos, infielder, outfielder Franklin Barreto. You had infielder Terran Vavra, outfielder Jordan Adams, and then the pitchers, the righties Rodolfo Martinez and Dylan Coleman, and the lefty Raul Alcantara. Again, none of these players were really fully in the mix to get an opening day roster spot, so none of them really surprising, but all could be interesting depth for the Orioles this year. And again, I could absolutely see Coleman ending up in the bullpen this year. I could see potentially Vavra on the roster if they needed him. I could, David Banuelos is the traveling catcher, that taxi squad catcher. We could see him activated in a game again, but not surprising. Camp now down to 48 players. And then the final update comes from Andrew Kittredge. We knew he got kind of that scoping procedure on his left knee on Friday to take out some of that cartilage and other things and clean it up in there. Well, Kittredge gave an injury update on Wednesday, and he said the initial outlook was kind of vague. It was a return anywhere from like June to the All-Star break. They weren't really sure how his knee would respond to the surgery. But Wednesday, he said there hasn't been much swelling at all. And he said the doctor said a lot of the recovery has to do with what the swelling looks like early. And he said everything, quote, points to returning earlier. So hopefully Andrew Kittredge can be back on the mound for the Orioles, maybe even at some point in late May. That'd be really nice to, have less than 2 months you go without him and you get back your big offseason relief addition to give yourself another good veteran late inning option to an Orioles bullpen that's already looking really good heading into 2025. But that'll do it for today's episode, and we'll do it for this week on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Subscribe wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating and a review. And if you have any thoughts on the show, want to reach out, mailbag question, whatever, you can always email me at lockedonorioles@gmail.com. Look ahead to this weekend in spring training baseball. Friday game for the Orioles is at home against the Twins. There's no broadcast. There's no statcast of that one. 2 games on Saturday. The first one at 1 o'clock is at the Pirates. There is a broadcast and a statcast of that one, so that's nice to have. And then at 6 o'clock on Saturday, the spring breakout game happens where all the Orioles prospects take on the Yankees prospects. That'll be at 6 o'clock at Ed Smith Stadium. There will be a broadcast of that on MLB TV. And MLB Network, but there will not be StatCast data, unfortunately, for all those cool prospects in that game. And then the Orioles have split squad games over the weekend, so 2 of them on Sunday. They are at the Tigers at 1 o'clock. That one will have StatCast, but no broadcast. And then they will be at home against the Phillies on Sunday as well. That one, no StatCast and no broadcast, but we'll get some more news. We'll get some more data from all those games, 5 of them in total this weekend, and we'll break them down on another Spring Training Notes episode coming up here on the show on Monday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, Your team every day.